Hello everyone, this is Dean Kelley again with the Georgia Transparency Coalition. We're here in Lafayette, Georgia with SO Commissioner Shannon Whitfield. Thank you for meeting with us today, Shannon.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. We are, as you well know, that Walker County is transitioning from a SO Commissioner to a Board of Commissioners, so that's going to be something new that Walker County will be working with coming in the future. We've had a SO Commissioner since before World War I. But Shannon, if you would, just kind of, you came into office 4 years ago, if you would just kind of lay out the scenario of how things were for Walker County when you came into office.
Yeah, that's something that I don't ever forget because it was such a big mess. You know, financially, the county was just bleeding financially on every aspect of county government. And the biggest problem that we had is we didn't have any cash on hand to speak of. There was about $800,000 cash when I came into office, which is a lot of money, but when your payroll is $1.1 million a month, that's not a lot of money. And then we discovered very quickly that there was $3.5 million worth of accounts payable to vendors that had not been paid. It was carryover, and about $3 million of that was over 60 days past due. And so we had a cash flow crisis coming in day one because we didn't have enough money to pay the vendors. We didn't have enough money to meet the first month's payroll. And so we immediately had to spring into action and start working on a cash flow analysis plan. The county had not done one in many years, and so we said, you know, we got to have this information very quickly. And so it took us about a week and a half, and we discovered very quickly that we were going to need about $8 million to get us through the rest of the calendar year. And so it's kind of a difficult position to be in when you have a marketplace that had read the prior audits of the county, and none of your local lenders, none of your local banks would loan Walker County money at all, and had not in about 3 years. They were having to go to New York and sometimes Atlanta to get funding. So fortunately, the Bank of Lafayette stepped up that second week I was in office and loaned us a $4 million tax anticipation note. A lot of people say, well, what's a tax anticipation note? And it's basically just payday lending for government. When you don't have enough money to operate on and you've got to go borrow money, it's payday lending. And so it's just the government's way of doing that. Later in the year, we were able to work with First Volunteer Bank, and they were able to lend us the other $4 million along about May or June of that year. And so we ended up, $8 million worth of additional funding that was needed to keep the county operational just to do the basics, on top of having $70 million worth of debt on the balance sheet and trying to figure out how we're going to service that debt as well. So proper budgeting, proper accountability. We had to increase some of our revenue streams as well, but basically just making the cuts and the management tools put in place along with purchase order systems allowed us to start turning this thing around slowly. So when we got into that second year, we only needed $1 million tax note. We was able to not even need that until we got into like September of 2018. So we'd gone, 8 or 9 months without having to borrow any money. Because these tax notes, you got to pay them back every year. Yeah. So in December of 2017, that $8 million we paid or borrowed, we had to pay it back. So we started off fresh with the new year, made it to the end of August before we had to borrow. Borrowed $1 million on a tax note to set up a $6 million tax line, but only had to borrow $1 million of that at that time, and got that paid back in about 35 days. And as we continue to work the business principles and implement our plan and our financial approach to this, when we got into the year 2019, we didn't have to borrow any money at all. And so we were cash flow positive throughout the entire year. And so that took place much faster than I had either hoped or dreamed that it would. To be able to get out of the tax anticipation note business within 2 years was a pretty phenomenal thing when you're having to borrow $8 million just to survive. And so we've continued to be cash flow positive. And if everything stays as it should, and these business principles are kept in place and budgeting, we should never put ourselves in a position as a county where we're having to do these tax notes ever again. And so that was something that was critically important because we were spending so much money in interest.
Yeah, just servicing debt.
Just servicing that debt was just an incredible amount of interest. And you can buy a lot of police cars and things of this nature and do a lot of things for public safety if you don't have this staggering debt. And so with that, through the 2019 audit, which was just released on our website last Friday, we've got our debt down round numbers to about $40 million as of September. So we started out at 70 million, down to 40 million, and then since then, because some of these bond payments are due in January, at the end of January we were down under $35 million. So we've reached that halfway point with our debt, and I think one more term in office and keeping things structured the way we have it, that we can get completely out of debt in one more term.
That would be awesome. Another thing I want to address, you got you a...
Oh, it got me a little buggy there.
Yeah, you got your buggy there. I don't want to see you get stuck.
Okay.
Too bad Alan Painter's not here to take care of that.
Yeah, we got rid of him. He's still living.
Yeah. At the time when you came to office, I was under the impression that one of the shining stars that we did have in Walker County was our water. And of course, once you got in there, you found out that was an issue too. So you kind of want to explain what that situation was when you came in after, of course, I don't think you was aware of it either.
No, I wasn't. I was very surprised because actually the first two board meetings that we had, both in January and February, the manager at that time told us how great everything was and told us what a good system we had. And I found it to be a little curious on the second meeting that basically David was telling us everything he told us on the first meeting. But we sitting there with a brand new board because in December of 2016, BB appointed all new board members. And so then I came in as the chair of the board, and so all 5 board members, we're sitting there brand new hearing these things for the first time, and it all sounded great. I was a little curious that I had not seen any of the current financial information and was having to ask for that. And so we got, about halfway through the year and realized that we had a serious problem when one of our wells tested positive for E. coli. So that's a reportable event, naturally so. It needs to be reported to the state. And when we report that, they say, okay, they looked in our profile and said, just turn your filter plant on. Just start filtering water. You'll need to filter water from this point forward. And they come back at the plant and said, well, the plant doesn't work. We don't have the ability to filter water. And so a couple of the board members went down there and looked. Initially, they're like, this thing looks like an old rusty battleship that's just decayed. So there's no way this thing's operational. And the company that had built the system was no longer in business, so there was no way to get parts. So we found out the hard way very quickly when we had to do a bulk water advisory that we don't have a water filter plant, and so we had to bring down a couple of trailers from Pennsylvania. And the state worked with us fantastic. They have some real expert people in their department on water. They came and stood beside us, not as much as a regulatory with a big stick, like sometimes you think with state or federal government, but they really come in here to be our partners. And they said, look, here's our cell numbers. You can reach us 24/7. We're here with you. We're going to get you through this. And so they started pointing us in the right directions of who to contact, and we were able to get 2 of those filter trailers brought down and got those operational over the holiday week of July 4th of 2017. And those filter trailers are pretty amazing technology. They'll filter 1 million gallons of water each.
Wow.
And it's just phenomenal to see how those things work and how high-tech they are.
Is that in a 24-hour period? Or?
Yeah, that's in a 24-hour period. Those things run 24/7, and they will do 1 million gallons each. So for every 1 million gallons you need, just get another trailer. And so that technology is some of the best there is. It is an added cost that we have right now as we're working through all the engineering work to be able to build a new plant. And it's like anything you do from a utility standpoint. You think, oh, this ought to be quick and easy and simple, and we ought to be able to just go do this. It's a little more complicated than that with the studies and the proposals and things and the engineering work that has to be done. One of the key things that we did just recently is we had to do a water volume study. We needed to know how much water was in our aquifer, because we want to take our plant and take it up to about an 8 or 9 million gallon a day plant so we can prepare for the future growth. And by doing that, you have to do a water study, you have to do a drawdown. So we did like a 45-day drawdown where we're maximizing the system. And I think we were pulling about 7.5 million gallons a day out of the system, out of the aquifer, every day for 45 days. And so you look at how much you draw down, and they measure that. You have a third-party company comes in and measures that with some test wells, and they look at your recovery time. When you turn everything back off, what is your recovery time? And our recovery time was in less than an hour. And so we've got a phenomenal amount of water here in northwest Georgia in our aquifer, and we're going to continue to work with the state and work the plan to be able to build a new filter plant for our water system.
What's going to be the time frame on that?
It's probably still going to take about another 2 years to get that done. It's just the simple process of the time you actually order the plant. Everything's custom built, custom installed, and so just the construction alone will be about a year itself. And so, we're making decisions right now that are 40 and 50-year decisions.
Yes.
And so when I talked to the board, they were kind of panicking at first, and I said, look, we're going to look back and say, hey, the time it takes to do this, 3, 4, 5 years to get this done, it's worth the time and energy and effort and investment that we're doing, because we're making a decision that's going to carry this community forward the next 40 plus years. And so it's such a small amount of time in reality of the big picture. And so we've been having to look at the big picture of things and not just rush into what we're doing. And so we've got a great engineering firm out of Chattanooga that we work with CTI Engineering, our partners with the state, and we've made a tremendous amount of progress, but it's still something that's probably about a 2-year process still to go.
Okay. When you look at your first term, what were the biggest surprises that you had when you came into office? What's the accomplishments that you're most proud of?
Well, some of the biggest biggest issues or concerns, the things that caught me by surprise, I would say number one is probably the animal control issue that we have in our community. It's a big, big problem with the amount of animals that we have running at large, but also the number of people that just surrender animals. They'll come to the shelter and say, hey, we're going on vacation. We told the kids they were going to get the dog up and we're going to go to Disney World. And so they use an animal as leverage with their kids sometimes, and it just blows my mind.
You keep your pet or you go to Disney World?
Yeah, exactly. And it just blows my mind how people will do that with a household animal. Instead of taking it, putting it in a kennel or getting a neighbor or a friend or someone to keep the dog for a week, they want rid of the dog, and so they use that as leverage. But also, with that, the number of animals that were being euthanized in our county, when you look at the data and the history, they were euthanizing between 29 to 30 animals per week, every week, and had been going on for years. And so one of the very first phone calls that I got on the very first day in office was a lady out of Atlanta called and said, I want to know what your euthanasia rate is in Walker County. And I said, that's a great question. Today's my first day. I don't know that answer. But I said, we're going to get into that answer, and we're going to start publishing that every month. We get our feet under us. And so when I dug into that and found out the number of animals that were being euthanized over simply time and space. It wasn't there was anything wrong with these animals, or they were aggressive or sick. It was just time and space. You've been here too long, and we don't have enough space to keep you, so we're going to take you back and euthanize you. And so that was just gut-wrenching to me that was going on right here in our own county. And so we've changed that. We'll average sometimes anywhere between 0 to say maybe as many as 5 animals a month that we have to euthanize now for the entire month. And we're only euthanizing based off of extreme health issues or an extreme aggressive animal. If we can't work with these animals or vet them or save them or get them to a rescue that can work with them, then sometimes we have to make those tough decisions. And those are decisions that I leave in the full control of the staff. There's got to be 3 of them to agree that this needs to be done, and if 3 staff members agree that it needs to be done, as much of an animal lover as I know they are, I know they're making the right decision. And so the other thing is I knew we had a lot of potholes, but until you start looking at 700 miles almost of county roads and how fast the weather would deteriorate your roads. When you get a winter where you'll have a real warm day and then it drops and gets below freezing, and then it rains, and then just the asphalt just starts busting up. And the amount of money that it takes to fix these the right way. A lot of people had told me, and stuff I'd looked at is, you can repave a road for around $100,000 a mile. And so that's what I was going with, because that sounded like a lot of money. Well, that is if you put about a half-inch topper on one and you just kind of sugar-coat it or put lipstick on it, yeah, you can do it for around $100,000 a mile. But these roads that we're having to go in and deep patch and rebuild the base and then put a leveling layer on it and a top layer, when you get into that road reconstruction, we're running between $200,000 to $230,000 a mile.
Wow.
And so it really elevates the cost, and it's the old saying, pay me now, pay me later. If you don't maintain these roads and repave them when they start deteriorating and start cracking up, then you're going to pay a lot more later. And so that's what's happened to our county is we're having to go in and reconstruct and rebuild roads where if they'd have just been repaved and maintained, it's kind of like a leaking roof. If you catch it when it first starts leaking, it's not that bad, but if you wait for years, and then you've got a lot of other damage. And that's what's happened to our roads. We've gotten a lot of other damage. So fortunately, the citizens and the voters saw that back in 2017 and believed that we needed to make an additional investment in our road infrastructure and pass the T-Splosh, which I don't know how we would have done it without it. But by doing that, last year we was able to pave about 25 miles of road, doing 35 miles of road this year, and we need to get up to we're doing about 50 miles per year. And that's why with the upcoming Splosh, we have a large emphasis with our Splosh on our road infrastructure and public works along with public safety, which are two big areas going forward that we need a lot of focus on.
Yeah, and I know we had some bridge issues too. I know we had, 4 or 5 bridges that were in bad
Yes,
condition.
there's been 2 of those that have been replaced. The most recent one is on Old Lee School Road on the south end of the county. There's one under construction now on Hogjaw Road. There's another one that school buses couldn't cross. So that's something we talked a lot about during the campaign. We've got another one on Andrews Lane that will be done this year as well. And so it's a real issue when your infrastructure falls apart to the point that your school buses can't even maneuver in your county to safely haul your school children. And so that's a big emphasis of what we're trying to rebuild our infrastructure. Also, when the Hogjaw Bridge is finished, which should be done probably before the end of May, we've got it slated to completely repave it. And it's another road that's in horrible shape. Base is deteriorating in a lot of places. And so that's about 11 miles of road. And so that road's going to get a major overhaul and a base reconstruction as well this summer. It's actually the next road scheduled to be done. They're going to finish up on Old Bethel Road in the next couple of weeks. And then probably by the end of the month, they'll start paving on Hogjaw. So hopefully the bridge opening and the paving of Hogjaw will all line up about the same time.
I know that a lot of communities will bond some of the revenue, like their T-Splosh funds, so they go ahead and get some projects done. But you haven't done any bonding. You've pretty much been paying as you go.
Right, and I'm against bonding on projects like that unless they're just an absolute necessity of something at that moment. Plus, number one, the voters have to agree to do that. So when you put it in the referendum, you have to list that in there that the local government has the option to bond. And so we did not put that in the T-Splosh, neither is that in the Splosh. We had no desire to do any bonding at all. Because you spend so much of your money in attorney's fees and bonding costs. And then what really made me a true believer in that is when I came in 2017, the current Splosh that's in place was running short. They had over-projected. And so that was another thing that was causing us a financial crisis. We went about 3 years in a row as a county where about $680,000 to $700,000 was having to be taken out of the general fund to go into the bond payment account to pay the bond. And so I'm so glad that we did do that. I don't like taking on debt anyway. But if we would have done a bond, especially with the situation we're in now as a community with the COVID-19 viruses and your business is having to close, you don't know what your revenue is going to do. And so the safest way is the conservative way to sit back and say, we're only going to spend what comes in. If it doesn't come in, we're not going to spend it to make these capital improvements. And so that's the strong position that we've taken, and it has worked for us very favorably with the T-Splosh because it's refreshing to me to know, and I think for the citizens too, is that when they see road paving being done in Walker County, it's being paid for when the job's done. We're not financing that. We're not riding the vendor for a year like had been done in the past. When they get through, they give us an invoice, and we pay them in less than 30 days, and we move to the next road. And so that's the way you should do business.
I want to ask you a little bit about the Development Authority. I know that our credit rating was horrible when you came in. Actually, we were probably a junk bond.
We were junk status.
Junk status. And what are we now? A2, something like that?
We are an A1 rating. So back in August, we saw an opportunity that we had strengthened up our financials so much in 2.5 years that we worked with a company out of Atlanta that helped prepare us to go to the bond market, is what they specialize in. And so we were able to take 2.5 years worth of financial data and present that to Moody's rating agency. And Moody's they're a tough company, which is good because you know when you get your rating, you've earned it. They're not giving you anything. You have flat earned it. And so they took 5 years worth of history. So 2.5 years from the prior administration, 2.5 years from the current administration, and 2 very intense, long interviews that they drilled me on for about an hour and a half each phone call, making sure you understand your data. How did you get there? What improvements have you made? You know, they drill you on your numbers and understanding your own data. So they took us in August of 2019 from a junk status. We jumped all the way to an A1 credit rating with that one move. So some people thought we would end up with maybe a B rating or a B2 or B3. We went all the way to an A1. So that was a pretty substantial move for our county, which that just really shows how much we had strengthened the balance sheet. And that's really what it comes down to. People want to look at how much income do you have, what's your expenses, and that all plays into the balance sheet. But a lot of people don't understand you've got to build the strength of your balance sheet for your long-term good of your operation, this being county government or any business that you may have. Is the strength of the balance sheet is what you're focusing on.
As a result of that, you were able to refinance some debt that we had. What was it, about $15 million?
Yeah, there's about a $15 million bond that had been done back in the previous administration, back in 2015, and that was the Development Authority bond. And at that time, the credit rating being junk status, you got to come to the table with collateral. So the previous administration had to take our civic center, our ag center, our industrial parks, and Mount Co Farm, and use all of that as collateral and leverage every bit of that just to get the bond done. Plus the bond was very, very expensive to do because you're junk status, you're high risk. And so when we were able to refinance with an A1, we got all that release. We have none of that is being used as collateral now. All of that's free and clear. To my knowledge, we don't have anything in Walker County right now that's leveraged as collateral and that's a fixed asset. And then by refinancing that, we hit the bond market pretty good, plus having an A1 rating. We were able to save $3.9 million in interest
Over the term of the loan?
over the term of the loan, and we took almost 5 years off the debt, which was incredible. So it saved our county hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars actually, $3.9 million in savings that we made for the taxpayers to be able to do that just by getting our financial house in order.
Of course, I know you said that your goal is to get the county tax-free in this next term. Debt-free, I'm sorry. Debt-free in this next term. So what is the debt right now?
The debt, we're about $35 million round numbers.
Now, does that include the Development Authority debt?
It does.
Okay.
Sure
That's
does.
a question I get asked often.
It's all in. Yes, sir.
Sir.
Because our financial report has 2 component units in it. One being your health department, which is standard across the state. You include, it's on a separate line item of your balance sheet. But also your development authority has to be a blended component. And so the development authority debt is in our books. And that was one thing that wasn't being done in the past.
Yeah.
And that's why their financials were, I felt like I took over Enron when I first came in. Because 2 things, the development authority numbers was not in the audit at all, not any of the numbers. And the Erlanger debt was not in the audit. So you had about $25 million worth of debt that wasn't on the balance sheet. And so I went round and round with the auditing firm at that time. I said, look, this has got to be on the balance sheet. The citizens owe this money, unfortunately. We've got to properly report it. And so the 2016 audit was the first time that the Development Authority and the Erlanger debt hit the balance sheet.
That's good. Now, looking back at your term, that you served your first term, is there anything you'd do differently than what you've done these first 4 years?
Well, I have made a couple of mistakes. I mean, you're always going to make mistakes. We were so overwhelmed with our first budget process that when I did the first budget, we made a misstep. We didn't follow all the state guidelines on the implementation of the budget as far as, because we advertised and promoted and we had the budget hearings. We did those perfectly, and we actually had 2 more hearings than we was even by law supposed to be required to have. We went over and above. But when we got to the point of giving the 2 weeks notice of once the budget's finished, We just messed that up. And so we were called out on that, and rightfully so. And so we kind of had to hit the reset button on the budget, get it advertised in the paper, give it 2 weeks, have the public hearing on that. The budget didn't change, not even $1. And then when we had the 2 additional public hearings, no one even had any questions because we'd done so good at explaining it when we were going through the budget time. But once you get the budget done, then you've got to have 2 hearings and the posting after that. So if I had that to do over, we would have went back and sharpened up and made sure we had all the I's and T's dotted on that process of implementing the budget. So that was a blunder that I take full credit and responsibility for, that we could have done differently. As far as other things that I would do over, anything comes to my mind right off that I would say that I would actually do over. Yeah, we've done a few things probably hindsight that we've learned from, that we may tweak, but as far as just a real big blunder, that implementing that first budget was one that was just a horrible blunder. We definitely would do that over. But we've been able to stay focused in paying the debt off, enhancing the benefits and the pay for our employees, getting this Erlanger thing off of our plate. There's been so many things that have been accomplished that we're very proud of what we've done over the last close to 4 years.
Moving forward, of course, you're the sole commissioner, and you're running to be the chairman of the board, so to speak, which is really a new position. So, what adjustments are going to have to be made? You don't even know who you'll be dealing with yet until these gentlemen are elected that are running. So, what adjustments and what preparations are you making, assuming that you're re-elected, to deal with this new board?
Yeah, that's one thing that we've already started working on internally, is preparing for as smooth a transition as possible. Because when we talk to other counties around us that have changed over time from a sole commissioner to the board, they've had a lot of problems, and you have a lot of clashes, and you have a lot of things that don't go right, they tell us. And so we want to learn from those experiences that these other counties have had and take that warning of advice from them. And so one of the things that we've done is, just like on the upcoming squash, I know that's something that everybody doesn't dive into the details every time. And so I invited in all the candidates to the office to sit down with Robert and I back before the COVID-19 virus hit, fortunately, and went through in detail and give them an understanding of what goes into that. And then we committed at that point to invite them in once the primary election's over, whoever's still standing, who's ever still in the race, regardless of party. And we're going to meet with them on a monthly basis just to start giving them the insight of the current things that are going on. And it's not that there's problems, it's just the day-to-day operations of them understanding the details, because county government's quite complex. And so it's going to be collaboration and learning how people like to communicate, because not everybody likes to communicate the same way. Some people like text messages, emails, some like face-to-face. So learning everyone's method of the way they like to communicate, getting them as much information as they desire to have, and also helping them get up to speed on all of the uniqueness of county government, because there's a lot of things from a state statute standpoint that there's a huge learning curve.
Yes, so there's definitely going to be a learning curve.
It's quite different from city government. It's quite different from a school system. I mean, there's a lot of differences the way county government is set up, and a lot of that is because you have constitutional officers, and they have certain responsibilities and things that that they have to do, and so everybody's got to stay in their lanes. And so that's one of the very first things that everybody needs to fully understand, so we don't cause any issues or problems with our other constitutional, other elected officials, is understand exactly how all of that works. And so there's a lot of training with the association. ACCG has 96 training classes. Now, over and above your new hire, not new hire, but your new elected orientation that you go to. So I want to continue to encourage them to go to as many classes as they can. They offer those 2-3 times a year. But also just trying to build the teamwork and the collaboration as we go forward and work as a team, as a unified model.
Well, we could probably spend another hour talking about this, but Shannon's given us a lot of good information, and hopefully we'll be able to sit down with him in the future and talk again. Thank you so much. Thank you, Shannon.
Thank you for having me.
Well, thanks again.